welcome to Montgomery College and to our DACA Immigration Policy panel. I am absolutely delighted to have you here this evening, and I look forward to what I know will be a robust conversation. I'm very pleased to welcome our guests, our students, faculty and staff, and community members. I thank you all for choosing to be here tonight and to be a part of this dialogue. This was organized very quickly, so not everyone was able to clear their schedules. I do know that we have a number of people who are fighting the beltway to get here this evening, but I really want to thank so many people who chose and were able to be here. Senator Van Hollen wanted to thank Lillian Cruz. Is she here? Right? Thank you so much for being here tonight from his office. We know that he's doing tremendous work in this space on Capitol Hill, and want to thank others who were able to be here this evening. A deferred action for childhood arrivals was an executive decision or order action taken by President Obama in 2012. As most of you know, DACA enables eligible young people without documentation who was brought here to the U.S. as minors to receive deferred action from deportation. More than 15,500 people in Maryland have been approved for DACA status as of June of 2016. And I'm sure some of our panelists here will talk a little bit about how those numbers have changed since that point. About 800,000 people have received DACA status nationwide. Now, when President Obama announced the DACA program, he described these young people as, quote, young people who study in our schools, they play in our neighborhoods, they're friends with our kids, they pledge allegiance to our flag. They are Americans in their hearts, in their minds, and in every single way but one, on paper. He captured that essence, I think, better than I would be able to do. But he also acknowledged that DACA was meant, and I'm quoting him here by saying, to mend our nation's immigration policy, to make it more fair, more efficient, and more just. He didn't say there was an answer to all of our challenges. He said it was a part of a patchwork of solutions. And he also called out Congress for having failed to address immigration policy in a comprehensive way. And that's part of the reason why we're here tonight. Montgomery College has been a strong supporter of DACA and Dreamer students since 2012, if not before that. With about currently 600 DACA or Dreamer students enrolled at Montgomery College, the college is committed to promoting their well-being, keeping them in school, and searching for solutions that allow them to stay in the United States. We have taken a number of formal steps over the years to protect students where we have been able to do so. These include guaranteeing eligible DACA students and students with temporary protected status in-county or in-state tuition, depending on their residency. We've advocated tirelessly for the Maryland DREAM Act when it was working its way through Annapolis. We recently issued some detailed guidance for DACA students about the security of their personal information and records here at the college, and I've assured students that their tuition rates will not change this semester as a result of any changes in their DACA status. Our Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Monica Brown, also has distributed a list of resources available to the college and to the community, and has created a website that houses that information. We've made available personnel to guide students who find themselves with questions on each of our campuses, and I've done my own small part in advocacy for our students by communicating with our congressional delegation who represent Montgomery County and the state of Maryland in Congress to ask them to find a permanent solution to the plight of dreamers. Now, since DACA's rescission, numerous faculty and staff have contacted our legal offices here at the college to learn how they can support their students in the event of activity by Immigration and Customs Enforcement at one of the college's facilities. And while we think this is unlikely, and we hope that it is, we have sent guidance to our faculty and staff about their rights and the rights of our students in interactions with ICE officials on our campus. Today, as I'm sure you know, was the last day for DACA recipients to submit their renewal forms. So in some way, we are moving into a new era, literally as we speak. And while this is discouraging reality for many, and I hope that most of us would agree that, I have not lost hope. I think that what has impressed me the most since this decision has been the energy shown by our students here on our campus and the stories of students whose lives I've had the opportunity to be directly impacted by. I've been moved by our students' solidarity among all of our students about these issues here. And I think this is evidence, I believe, in the profound change in the fabric of American identity. Our student body has shown that formerly nationalistic paradigms may not have the same resonance in this generation. As a nation, we will have to allow for ways in which we outgrow certain traditional paradigms. And our students have been proactive, and that's putting it mildly, in putting together forums to support their fellow DACA recipients and colleagues with legal advice and advocacy, and simply a space to talk about the issues. I am truly proud of our student leaders and the work that they've done in this and their collaborators. And I'm also grateful to community organizations and members who've reached out to the college to figure out how they can help and be supportive, many of whom have also provided resources for scholarships for these students. I want to thank Casa de Maryland, the Bar Association of Montgomery County, the Columbus School of Law at Catholic University, and the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. It is in the spirit of these generous people and organizations that make me hopeful about a possible legislative solution for our DACA students. Now, if you live or work in Montgomery County, you've probably noticed a high level of solidarity with our DACA recipients here. And I'm personally proud to live in a county, in a community, and to work in an organization that sees the value of these young people as neighbors, as classmates, and as Americans. They bring talent, hard work, and the unique perspective that comes from straddling two or more cultures. Their presence is a vital part of the evolving notion of the American identity. And some of those who are on our panel tonight, I want to give them an opportunity to speak and to give our audience an opportunity to answer questions. So let me introduce our panelists briefly in the interest of time, because I think we will have a robust conversation this evening, and then move directly into the conversation, which I'm confident you will find very stimulating. Since we have such a large panel with a lot of expertise, I will direct you to the programs that are on your seats that has more detailed information about them and also what they have accomplished. And rather than listing all of their credentials, I'll ask you to read about them in your programs as we dive into the program. But very briefly, we have Amanda Frost, who actually she's not able to be here this evening. She was sick. I apologize there. Julia Gallette is a senior policy analyst at the Migration Policy Institute. We have Jorge Hernandez Fujigaki, is a professor of history and political science here at Montgomery College. Jonathan Jays Green is a Montgomery College alum and co-founder of the UNADOCU Black Network. Bernard Molina Garcia is a professor of philosophy at Montgomery College and also an attorney. We have a lot of those on the panel today. We have with us as well Sarah Monteroso is a Montgomery College student and DACA recipient. J.S. Rathod is a professor of law at American University's Washington College of Law and founding director of the school's Immigrant Justice Clinic. And we have Michelle Sardone as the legalization program director for the Catholic Legal Immigration Network Incorporated. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. And as we discuss, I'm going to ask Dr. Galat to provide us with an overview of DACA from her line of work, which is a policy analyst at the Michigan Policy Institute, Migration Policy Institute, not Michigan. And I hope that this will allow us to start from a common place of information about this work And then after that, we'll move on to hear 2 student stories and then open up to our panel for a broad-based conversation. With that, I will move to the side. And if you want to stay, do you want to stay at your seat? You can stay there or you can stay in the, okay, very good, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Pollard. It's great to be here. I just wanted to start by giving an overview of some of the numbers in terms of DACA recipients. There are a lot of numbers floating out there, and it's a little bit confusing. So I just wanted to give an overview. At the Migration Policy Institute, we estimate that there were 1.3 million people who were eligible to apply for DACA, who met the age requirements, education requirements, and years in the U.S. Of those, as Dr. Pollard said, just under 800,000 were ever approved for the program. And then the government put out some statistics a couple weeks ago that said that currently there are 690,000 young people in the country who hold DACA. And they also gave some statistics about those DACA holders. So we know that the great majority are from Latin America. 94% of DACA holders are from Latin America, and 79% are from Mexico alone. The application rates were lower for those who are eligible from Asian countries. Just 3% of DACA holders are from Asian countries. We know that the average age of DACA holders is 24 years old, so a lot of college age or young adults. In terms of states, the biggest number of DACA holders live in California. About 29% live there. The next biggest states are Texas, Illinois, New York, and Florida. Here in Maryland, they estimate that there are around 8,000 current DACA holders. So that's just a little bit over 1% of all DACA holders who are in Maryland. And then at the Migration Policy Institute, we tried to look at some of the jobs that DACA youth are holding. And so in kind of like broad education broad occupation categories, we saw that DACA holders tend to work in food, preparation and service occupations, in sales and related occupations, and in office administrative support. And we compared those occupations to those who are worked by similar undocumented or unauthorized immigrant young adults. And those who are not eligible for DACA tend to work more in outdoor kinds of jobs, in agricultural work or construction, whereas those, as I mentioned, who have DACA work more in indoor, white-collar occupations. So that kind of shows some of the promise of DACA, of being able to have work authorization and move into hopefully higher-paying jobs and different types of jobs. So that's just a little taste. We're also putting together a new profile of DACA holders that unfortunately we don't have ready to present tonight, but we should be releasing next week. So if you look at our website, we may have some new data if you're interested.
Very good. Thank you for that context. I think it's important to know the numbers as we move forward and to have an understanding of that. I also think it's important to understand the lived experiences of students and youth who fall into these categories. So I want to thank Dr. Gillette for that very thoughtful response, but also I'm going to ask 2 students, a current student and a graduate of the college, to share a bit about their stories so that we can frame this discussion and this conversation in terms of the real lives who are impacted by these types of decisions or the lack thereof, and particularly around immigration issues. So I'll first invite Sarah, who's a current student, to offer a little bit about her story, and then I'll turn to you, Jonathan, as well. Sarah?
My name's Sarah Monterosso. I'm 20 years old, and I've been living in the U.S. for nearly 16 years. So Jonathan and I are 2 of 800,000 DACA recipients, and we all have very unique stories, but they're all very similar in tone. You know, the commonalities between the stories are fear, struggle, sacrifice, but most importantly, a hope for a better future. So in 2001, my mother, she flew me and my 3 other siblings here from Guatemala City. At the time, Guatemala was going through a recession, and as you know, in many Latin American countries, it's not uncommon to have corrupt governments and dangerous conditions to live in. Thankfully, we didn't live in any of the dangerous conditions, but my mother no longer had a job. So her decision to bring us here was really for us, to give us the opportunity to have a career, go to school, be educated. So we flew here and we were on a tourist visa. You know, what we thought was a trip to the United States we thought was going to be short-lived, ended up staying here for 16 years. So pre-DACA, DACA originated in 2012. So the several years we've been living here, undocumented, have been hard to say the least. When we came here, we lived in one room, five people in one room. So, we come here, most of us don't have a lot of money and really have to build our way up to make it in the United States society. So, we went through school programs and we navigated our way through life undocumented. And then in 2012, just a ray of light. Sorry, I'm looking at my sister. It was some of the best news we ever received. I was very unhopeful that I could go to college. I thought I would have to immediately join the workforce, and ironically enough, I wouldn't have been able to join the workforce. When I found out my undocumented status, I knew I wasn't going to have a normal life, and that I would have to struggle. But Montgomery College has been a blessing. So to backtrack a bit, I have an older sister, and she was one of the first rounds of DACA recipients, and she now has a bachelor's in science, in architecture and environmental design. And I hope to get there one day. My aspirations in life, I want to be a journalist. Doesn't really work out too much because I'm a very emotional person.
That's all right.
But DACA has presented me with so many opportunities that I could never have dreamed of. I support my family with the income I make now. I work at a Ben & Jerry's in Rockville Town Square. I scoop ice cream for a living right now, and I go to school. I've also been the editor-in-chief of the newspaper here at MC. So I'm making my way into possibly having a career, and at this point I feel like I'm at a standstill. Should I keep pursuing my dream, or should I take a step back and think, is it even worth it? Is it worth going to school? Is it worth working full-time? So DACA has benefited my life in ways no one will ever know. It's definitely given me confidence to do anything I want with my life. And Montgomery College, you don't understand how thankful I am to be here. Even before I was a DACA recipient, I was able to pay in-county tuition as a dreamer. So this school has benefited me greatly, and I just hope I can still come here and finish and get my associates and go to work. So, I just want to end this with, pre-DACA, I struggled, my family struggled, but post-DACA, we continue struggling, but we have hope in our heart.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I need y'all to do a lot better than that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Jays Green, and I am undocumented. And I always choose to start my speeches saying that because I choose to reclaim my identity being undocumented in this country, understanding that for a long time, government leaders and people in position of powers have tried to use my undocumented status to deprive people like me of opportunities. I'm also fortunate to be the co-founder of the Undocu-Black Network. We are a multi-generational network of undocumented Black people across the country, organizing our own communities and building power. There's close to 600,000 Black undocumented folks across the country, right, that understand and experience immigration from a racial justice perspective. There was a study by the Black Alliance for Just Immigration at New York School of Law that showed that Black immigrants are 3 times more likely to be detained and deported for criminal convictions than any other immigrant group. And that doesn't really surprise you if you understand the ways in which Blackness is criminalized in this country. So we, as Undocu Black, are building power and fighting against it. Before all of this, I'm also a DACA recipient. And let's be clear, DACA worked. When I received DACA, I was in my 3rd year of school. I had finished Montgomery College. I had transferred to a 4-year institution, Goucher College, and had used every private scholarship I could find. I was really literally on the verge of dropping out because I just couldn't afford it. Receiving DACA meant that I was able to work full-time and go to school full-time to be able to afford it. Having DACA meant that I was able to apply for a private student loan because I'm ineligible for any federal financial aid. And it also meant that I was able to graduate on time, right? DACA also meant that I was able to access economic opportunities. I was able to buy a car, and I was able to apply for jobs in my field. After graduating from college, I was fortunate enough to work for the governor of Maryland and becoming the first undocumented person to work in the governor's office. I was only able to do that because of DACA, because it allowed me to legally work in this country, and it allowed me to continue to follow my pursuits. And last year, I was able to buy my first home. Now, it doesn't escape me the concept of purchasing land in this country and making a 30-year commitment to not only the bank, but also the city that I bought it in, Baltimore City, in the middle of the presidential election of the current occupant of the White House, right? What does it mean to say to my community that I'll be here for 30 years when I wake up every morning in a country where the government tells me that I'm not welcomed, right? But I still did it because our community continues to fight back and are resilient anyways. But I have to be honest, day in and day out, I'm more and more disillusioned with our country. As an immigrant, you come in with this shiny, beautiful idea of the American dream, and this country being the land of opportunity and freedom. And slowly but surely, you start to see that there are cracks to it, that there are asterisks to that dream, and that opportunity is not equal across the board, right? Day in and day out, I'm disillusioned by our elected officials, by our law enforcement officials, by different institutions that are happening right now. But what really keeps me grounded is that I keep thinking about this little old college that was bold enough, that was bad enough, to stand with undocumented students before it was popular, right? A college that was willing to set its own in-county tuition before the entire state caught up to it, right? A college with a board that authorized its president to fight for the DREAM Act because it believed that to fully be the community's college, we had to actually be affordable and accessible to the community, right? There is an incredible legacy in this institution here at Montgomery College that we need to continue, right? Because the future of our country is at stake. If we don't understand that what's happening at the national level and really at the global level, it's really a test of our values. We're missing something. People like me, people like Sarah, who so bravely shared her story, are just trying to be able to provide for their families, to survive, to just live in this country and thrive, right? So why is it okay to shut us out from opportunities? That is the question that I leave you with tonight. Thank you.
This is why we do the work. Those of us who work at this college, I know we couldn't help but feel very proud listening to a student and to hear an alum talk about the impact that we've had in their life and the honor to be a part of that. So I think I'll start this panel off, and we have a number of folks here who may be able to take this question on. And I have several, and I'm hopeful that I'll get through a few of them. We already talked earlier about I may not get through all of them, but we're going to have a little bit of a dialogue here. And this first one really tries to set a context around this issue as well. What is the role of the executive branch in immigration versus that of the legislative branch? And what next steps could be taken by either branch in the DACA situation? So we have a number of attorneys on this panel, and I'm not going to pretend to know which one your specialization is, but I'm going to turn to one who I know is a faculty member here, and I'm going to ask Professor Molina Garcia, if you might want to try and take that on and see if there's an opportunity here to help us understand the executive and legislative branches and where we really are in terms of this DACA situation.
So I'm going to punt because this is decidedly not my area of expertise. But I would just ask that the experts who are going to talk about it also add to it this funny thing that most of us as lay folks don't understand, which is that the constitutional laws that we all associate with the Bill of Rights work in a funny, slightly different way if you're not a U.S. citizen. So that kind of, to me, is a really interesting way that colors this whole idea of the executive-legislative interplay.
Sure. Judge, you want to say?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to thank Montgomery College for inviting me in just to say how impressed I am with the institutional commitment to the DACA program and how impressed I am with both Sarah and Jonathan. It really was great to hear you guys share your stories and your perspectives. So, regarding this question, I think many of us have learned right in grade school that we have three branches of government. There's the judiciary, there's the executive, and then the legislative, and we know that the legislative traditionally makes the laws, and the role of the executive is to enforce the laws. But with the development of the government over the last several decades, that has changed a little bit. And although Congress, yes, is primarily responsible for making laws, we see in the executive branch the growth of all these very large administrative agencies, right? Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, Department of Justice, et cetera, that themselves create policy. So in the area of immigration, we have the Department of Homeland Security, we have the State Department, we have the Department of Labor that all have a little piece of the immigration puzzle, and all of them are developing policies relating to immigration. And that includes regulations, it includes memos, it includes cables right from the State Department. And then on top of that, we have the president, who is the head of the executive branch, who has the authority to issue executive orders, right? And so these executive orders are generally permissible, right, as long as they're not inconsistent with something that Congress has already legislated. So as part of its authority to deal with these bodies that are regulated, the president can and does issue these orders, right? So that's just a very brief kind of overview of how the lawmaking functions of these agencies. And often when Congress doesn't act, right, which is what happened for many years in the context of the Dreamers, right? There were many efforts to pass a law. President Obama said, well, we got to do something, right, in the face of congressional inaction. And then you saw the executive action that was issued in 2012. Now, what next steps? This is a great question, right? So I know there are several bills in Congress right now, right? President Trump has kind of passed it off to Congress to act. So there are a number of bills in Congress that would essentially create a pathway to legalization for the Dreamers. Those have different provisions. I'm not going to get into the details, but most of them will require a multiple-year wait and meeting many of the criteria that are required for DACA in order to get a green card. The wait is anywhere from 2 to 3 years to 10 years, depending on the bill. And then, of course, technically, is there a possibility that there could be another kind of executive action? I guess in theory, but the problem is that the administration has kind of shot itself in the foot because they've claimed that it was illegal in the first instance. So for them to try to do it again, if Congress doesn't act, would be very difficult.
So maybe if I could continue on that thread, because I noted, I think it was the ACLU today, announced that they were joining, or maybe having a different lawsuit, but joining a lawsuit with 15 states and the District of Columbia that's suing the Trump administration over its decision to end DACA, arguing that the repealing the program causes, quote, immediate harm obviously, even as we think about the stories you've heard here, and does not provide due process rights to the young people involved. What does that really mean? And Jayesh, if you want to try that, and anybody else want to join in, feel free to do so. What's the likelihood in your mind as you think about the judiciary branch's role in this, that it might offer a solution or remedy to the lawsuit that's been presented?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, as lawyers do, right, as soon as we disagree with something, we try to find a way to litigate it. And there has actually been, as Dr. Pollard noted, a lot of litigation in a relatively short amount of time around DACA rescission. And so we were just talking in advance. I know of at least 4 lawsuits. It sounds like another one was filed today, so at least 5 lawsuits that are kind of larger lawsuits. And they're bringing all different kinds of claims. So as Dr. Pollard mentioned, a lot of the claims around due process, right? So that was somehow a violation of the Constitution to basically present DACA as an opportunity to these persons and then kind of yank it away. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit more complexity to that, but there's a set of due process claims. There's also other claims that under different federal statutes, right? A lot of them are under something called the Administrative Procedures Act, which is basically the set of rules that need to be filed whenever a new set of regulations or a new kind of agency policy is implemented. There's actually a very interesting claim also that was brought under, we call it the Equal Protection Doctrine, that basically, and the gist of that claim is that because the president has made comments against Mexican Americans, and that they're imputing those comments into the intent behind the DACA rescission, since so many of the DACA recipients are Mexican nationals, that they're saying essentially that there was an anti-Mexican animus in the DACA rescission, which I thought was an interesting argument. Mm-hmm. I think frankly a lot of these legal arguments are going to be difficult to win because they don't have really strong footing in terms of precedent. Mm-hmm. There's one that I think is decent, which is that when an agency decides to revoke a policy, which is essentially what happened here, they can't do it if it's quote unquote arbitrary and capricious. There has to be a reason for them to revoke the policy. In this case, the reason that they gave is that, well, it was illegal in the first instance. But there are a lot of people who believe that no, DACA wasn't unconstitutional. It was a proper exercise of the president's authority. So that might be one of the arguments that will hold water. But frankly, although we've kind of relied on the courts for the travel ban, I wouldn't necessarily rely on the courts for this because, again, the claims aren't as clear-cut.
Anybody else want to chime in on that before I move to another one? Okay. Let me move to the next question because I think there's an interesting thing to me about understanding trends in migration and how that has played a significant and maybe unacknowledged directly effect in the DACA debates. And I'm interested to hear from historians and political scientists on the panel and others, immigration specialists. Are there contexts for these trends, economic, geopolitical, social, or religious, and perhaps even some that Jonathan alluded to in his comments, that need to be included in discussions around DACA and immigration policy in this country? What are some of the root issues that you might offer that are at the center of this debate? Who want to try and take that question? I was hoping we would. Go ahead.
I think that the discussion on DACA, the debate on DACA, had to be placed not only in the social but the historical context. Yes. There is a reality that in the last 50 years, close to 60 million people, immigrants, have moved to the U.S. And out of those 60 million people, nearly 30 million come from Latin America. Mm-hmm. You see? Mm-hmm. So the debate about DACA is about inclusion and exclusion. Okay, and the DACA recipients, as Julia mentioned, the bulk of them come from Latin America. Mm-hmm. See, so that's the reality, and it's quite interesting that the issue of basically the immigration law that is contemplated by President Trump, it will try to discard the concept of family reunification, thanks to which, in the year 1965, millions of us have been able to move to the United States, like me, from Mexico. You see? And now you stress merit-based, basically, criteria. And I was just going over that, if you allowed me for a minute.
Please.
I have something here that is quite interesting. This is something that Time magazine put together. Find out if President Trump would let you immigrate to America. Okay? This is the Race Reforming American Immigration for a Strong Employment Act that is being supported by President Trump. Would you qualify for legal immigration to the U.S.? Answer the following questions to find out. You need at least 30 points to be eligible to apply for immigration. How old are you? It ranges between 18 to 21. They assign points from 0 to 10. The age bracket that get the most points are the ones that you can find between the age of 26 and 30. Therefore, I'm out. So I basically apply myself this test. 0. So over 50 years of age, that's me, 0. Okay, what's your highest level of education? Foreign bachelor's, 5 points, that's me. That's not bad, 5 points. So that's what I get. Because they prioritize people that have, basically, that have degrees in STEAM. So I get 0. I have a doctoral degree from the University of Chicago, 0 points for me because it's in the humanities. On the back, what's your English ability? Maybe I'm too arrogant, but I think I'm absolutely fluent. You see? But if you were to ask one of President Trump's supporters, I think it would be poor, 0 points. But I gave myself the highest points, 12 points. So I get 12 points plus 5 for, the equivalent to a bachelor's degree, so I get 17 points. Do you have a job offer? Since I wouldn't be here, but in Mexico, no job offer. So 0 points. Do you have a Nobel Prize or a major international award? 0. Have you won an Olympic medal in the past 8 years? 0. Do you plan on investing money in the U.S.? No, because I have to have at least $1 million. 0. You can get a visa, if you have like $1 million visa. So what I got was all in all 17 points. I fell short by 13 points. So I wouldn't be able to qualify. They wouldn't extend me an invitation. And what is also quite interesting and revealing, and I have something here that I would like to read to you. I have them somewhere here. These are the words of the press secretary, Mr. Trump press secretary. We must reform our green card system, which now favors low-skilled immigration and puts in main stand on U.S. taxpayers, most of them from Latin America. We must base future immigration on merit. We want those coming into the country to be able to support themselves financially, to contribute to our economy, and to love our country. To love our country and the values it stands for. Under a merit-based system, citizens will enjoy higher unemployment, rising wages, and a stronger middle class. This is something that's been supported by two senators, Tom Cotton and David Perdue. And one of them lawyers, the other one with, as I understand, a master's degree in the scientific field. I also tried to respond to this form that I used for myself, and they flunked.
So what I find very powerful about the commentary you just offered there is the way in which immigration policy in this country now is being cast as a burden, and that there is a higher standard by which we are expecting those who come into this country to demonstrate their ability to step into the America as it is being crafted now, versus what our history may have been in this space for the last century almost. Would that be a fair assessment?
And I would like to raise a question, and you have to ask yourself, would it make a difference if the hundreds of thousands of DACA students or DACA recipients were from Germany, whites from Germany, whites from England, whites from France? Would it make a difference in the position of the Trump administration? I think it would make a big difference.
Other comments?
Back
Please.
to Jonathan's point about the American dream. For so long, the U.S., we've been so proud to hold ourselves out to the world as the exceptional place where the American dream is a possibility, right? Like, where else can you go get a slice of pie and freedom? Give us your poor, give us your talented, give us everybody, e pluribus unum, our diversity is our strength. The problem is that kind of worked, and our face is changing, right? The American face is changing, and I think it makes a lot of people profoundly uncomfortable. And I agree. I think the debate about DACA is not about the finer policies of labor and immigration. It's about American identity. Who gets to become American? Who gets to call themselves American? You know, and to look at Sarah or Jonathan and to say, well, we're going to decide whether you get to be American, but we need to take these other things into account, is disingenuous, right? To look at them and say, you're not American is, it's just disguise for a very strong desire to safeguard American identity as a privileged state for people that have been primarily white and Christian.
So for whom, by whom, at a standard that is very different than what we have historically provided these standards to other people who come to this country.
Although, sorry,
go ahead, come on. You know, I'm trying to hold back.
No, you know, me too. But I think it's one of the fascinating things. It's impossible to look at the history of immigration in the U.S. and separate it from race, right? Because we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? Once upon a time, we were like, oh, we're bring people, and there were a lot of Chinese immigrants, and we were cool with that when it was just cheap labor. But when Chinese immigrants became Chinese families, and they wanted to be part of this, now we had a problem with it. So it's the story of American immigration, the story of the development of the American dream. It's always has this nasty underbelly, which is the story of race and racism and the role of whiteness in American identity.
Well, if you want me to really go there, then let's even take it back further and let's talk about our original sin as a country, that being slavery. So there is an interesting stuff. You know, Toni Morrison wrote this wonderful book of essays, and it's called Playing in the Dark. It's probably written in the late 80s, early 90s. And she talks about whiteness and the literary imagination and how so many of our canonical texts grapple with this issue of whiteness and blackness and brownness and Americanness, and we still have not figured out how to resolve that. So for me, it's very hard for me to step on this other side, but I think your point is well taken, and as we've tried to allude to here, there are some folks who have a different position on some of these issues. So I think I'm going to try and play devil's advocate here and invite some folks here to help me do this. To what extent does long-term immigration policies necessitate some tough decisions? And what I mean by that is that planning for the needs of a large, complex society, such as the one that we have now, really means that we have to have some predictable patterns as it relates to roads and schools and public hospitals, all the resources of a complex society. How do we accomplish this while also accounting for circumstances that might justify unpredictable waves of immigration? Who wants to take that one on? I got names. I'll just start calling names.
You have to call on somebody.
Thank you, Miss Julia.
Nation of laws, and I think that really represents the balance that we have. You know, opponents to DACA, opponents to unauthorized immigration say, you know, this is a country of rule of law, the law is the law, illegal is illegal, and we need to face that. And I think you can't ignore that side of the argument, but there's also the situation that we have ourselves in, that we have a population of 11 million unauthorized immigrants, and we got here through many, many years of relying on the labor of immigrants, of, you know, attracting immigrants, taking their tax payments. The whole country is kind of, I think, implicated in a way in the situation that we've brought ourselves to. So to say that we're going to crack down now on illegal immigration, we're going to end DACA because it's unconstitutional, it's just, you know, it's such a huge system and a huge problem, and you can't enforce something that's so big. Like, we do not have the resources, nor is it humane to deport everybody who's here. So before we're going to kind of come down on the side of law and order, we need to have laws that make sense. We need to fix our problem. And I think that most people on both sides of the political spectrum agree that our immigration system is broken. We're not in a good place in terms of immigration. We need to fix it. We need to allow, a path to legal status for people before we start really enforcing our immigration law. And yes, we need to make sure that people come here legally, that we have some order, some predictability, that we create pathways so that people who want to come here and work have a legal way to do so. But it's just the order in which you do it. Are we going to crack down now with this huge system that we have and so many people here without authorization? Are we going to fix our system first and then focus on law and order? So there's definitely a balance that has to be struck.
But Julia, let's be honest here. Sarah took a job from somebody working at Ben and Jerry. Jonathan took a job that could have been in the governor's. These are for good, hardworking Americans who came here to this country and been here, were born here, and now all you're doing is saying that we're supposed to ignore the laws of the land. Where do we stop?
Yeah, so in terms of that competition, it's just not the way that our economy works, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not just like there's this many jobs and more people come and there's only this many jobs. When people come to the country, they consume goods, they consume services, they create more jobs, they start businesses, small businesses, big businesses, and they create more jobs. So when you add people to our country, to our economy, the economy grows. That's basically what happens. And we know through, decades of research by top economists that there's really not a lot of evidence that immigrants are, hurting the job prospects of US-born workers or hurting the wages. Especially over, a 10-year period, our economy adjusts and people end up just as, well as they started off. There's a little bit of competition that can happen among US-born high school dropouts or earlier waves of immigrants and then new waves of immigrants. But even that competition, it's pretty small. Overall, the picture is that immigrants don't steal jobs. They just, add to the growth of our economy.
And if I could just add on to
Please.
something that Julia was saying, I think to only look at immigrants as kind of workers rather than these individuals that can come here to the U.S. and are job creators for other people. And, people that have come to this country as refugees, undocumented, other types of visas, the number of jobs that they've created and businesses that they've created here, I think only looking at as employees versus what contributions they make and they create for U.S. citizens, I think is also important to keep in mind.
I love that because we assume that the immigrant experience is one of a burden and that they are working for someone versus this idea that they are oftentimes business starters, entrepreneurs who are bringing vital work to our country and at the same time very intentionally creating jobs for other people. So we've had this kind of warped narrative that's seeming to play out in very, I would say, intentional ways, right? Because if I have to see you as nuanced, if I have to see you as having a different experience than what I think in my head, then I might have to readjust my perspectives about how I see your worth and value in this country, perhaps, right? All right, I'll stop. I got to pull back again. Sorry.
I think just piggybacking off what you were saying, and I think that's partly what makes the DACA rescission so insidious, because it's not going for the, for my parents' generation that had to take the blue-collar jobs to pay for my education. It's nipping the bud of the kids that are getting the skill set and the know-how to be the job creators, and it's going after that.
Very good point, Jonathan.
Completely agree. I think in terms of this debate about this being a country of laws and legal is legal, part of illegal, don't you understand? What I'm really always taken by the argument is that as a Black person, right, when I think about what's been legal in this country, right, it doesn't make me too comfortable, right? We think about the fact that slavery was legal in this country, right? When this country was founded, folks with my skin color were 3/5 of a person, right? So law and legal does not equate to moral, doesn't equate to right or human, right? So there's a lot of unpacking that needs to be done to make sure that we have a legal system that matches what we profess our values.
Anybody else want to tag in on that? Yes, thank you. Yes.
One observation. So DACA is obviously a transformative program for so many people, but I also think we need to keep in mind how that the program in many respects is reiterating narratives of good immigrants versus bad immigrants, which I think are very concerning and problematic, and they're also kind of creating impossibly high standards of worthiness for membership in our community, right? So, of course, we have people like Sarah and Jonathan who are amazing, right? And absolutely should stay and will stay, right? We'll find a way. But then you have people probably in their peer group who may have at one point made a poor decision and have a criminal record, right? And they're just one moment, right, in their life they made a poor decision, which everyone in this room has done, right? And as a result of that, they're completely out of contention for any kind of legalization program. And I think we really need to question that and make sure that as we're propping up these programs that allow people a pathway to legalization, that we are creating that space for nuance and understanding that we are complex beings, that as a society we have to take ownership of not just the best and the brightest, the cream of the crop, but also that we have complex people in our midst and they are contributing in a lot of ways and we can't just rule people out because of, one or two bad decisions they've made in their past.
Well, and it's really a question about their whole humanity. I found that whole discussion. I had several friends who went to calculate their points on the immigration, on the proposed model that's being advanced, and this idea that we would apply a point system to, in effect, evaluate someone's humanity when we yet and still have not necessarily applied those same standards to those folks who identify or who are born American. It's a very interesting dichotomy that is being advanced as an either-or dichotomy. And in a lot of ways, for me, it's a very false dichotomy about how we think about what it really means to be a complex citizen in this country or a person who lives here as well. Anybody else? Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I hope that I'm addressing the issue that you're raising. When you talk about the marriage system, what you are doing, and that's quite, I would say, deviant, you are basically, just by virtue of a law, if were to be passed, you're basically precluding the possibility of that would to be potential immigrants from Latin America would be coming, because the bulk of them have low level of formal skills, and they are keenly aware of that. They know that, because they are familiar with basically, we coexist with undocumented aliens on daily basis. They work in landscaping, they work in construction, they work in the hospitality industry. We know them quite well, hardworking people, okay? But we don't necessarily want them here, you see? So how do you possibly make these systems such selective that perhaps only people who are extremely skilled, largely perhaps from places like China, perhaps from India, might be coming. And then you preclude the possibility that Latino will be coming through family reunification. And so, and we also have to basically to challenge the narrative about the use, for instance, of the word illegal aliens. You have something here that President Trump mentioned along with his, his advisor, reforming immigration to make America great again. So let's go back to the time when whites make the majority, over 83% before the 1965. Now they have dwindling numbers. A few decades from now, whites will be statistically a minority. And that's a demographic reality, and there are some people who are deeply concerned about that.
Make America great for whom? By what means? And to what end? It's an interesting conversation you pose here. So let's go a little bit further with that, because I think particularly in this economic argument that gets invited into this, this is not the first time that labor interests and immigration policy have intersected. I'm thinking here of H-1B visas, farm workers in our agricultural states, H-2B visas, which President Trump has taken advantage of himself to staff his businesses. How do we account for these in the national immigration policy? This is, I think, an interesting subtext of the conversation that you've advanced here, Jorge. How do we make account for that as a part of this debate or conversation around DACA and immigration policy in this country?
Yeah, so I think that, as I was kind of proposing, the way that we came to have a large unauthorized immigrant population is because our immigration laws are not well, aligned with kind of the supply and demand of workers. And so as we think about revising our immigration system, if there ever is an opening to kind of revise our temporary visa system, our permanent visa system, and better align our laws with kind of, who wants to come to the country, who benefits the country, what workers we're relying on from abroad. We definitely need to look at the temporary visa system as well. As you've been mentioning, President Trump's administration and some members of Congress are really arguing for more high-skilled immigration and less, lower skilled or family-based immigration, but we know that immigrants are playing really vital roles across the skill spectrum of our economy. So some of that is through, farm worker visas, some of that is through other temporary visas, some of that is through high-skilled H-1B visas. And so as we think about our laws, it's important to think through kind of all of these parts of this big system that we have and how do they fit together and how can we really meet the needs of the country. And one thing that we think at the Migration Policy Institute is that we just overall need to build a lot more flexibility into our system. We haven't changed our laws since the infrastructure was set in 1965, there were some revisions in 1990, but we have really badly outdated laws, and everything has changed since then. So we need to make sure we don't get in a situation like that again. So how can we build in flexibility so that we don't have to anticipate every future need, but we can kind of allow our system to adapt and change over time as migration flows, come from different parts of the world and die down from other parts of the world, as new jobs that we can't even imagine today get created and new economic needs. So I think there's just a need to kind of think about each piece of the system and then how to make it flexible to work.
So I'm going to ask one more question. I have several, but then invite the audience to, if you want, there's a microphone in the middle. If you'd like to pose a question, I'd invite you to do that. Please do so, because y'all don't want to keep hearing my questions, but I'm happy to do this. But I'm struck by this moment in time. I want to go something to several things that people have raised here. And it strikes me that there has to have been some other period in American history where we have grappled with immigration, maybe not at the same level and maybe not around the same populations that we're doing this right now. Is there anything that we might learn from our history as a country around issues of immigration that might inform how we approach these issues and look for solutions now? And I don't know if that was one that was on the questions that I sent you, but it's one that I keep thinking. We keep revisiting things, and sometimes we never take the opportunity to actually learn from the history that we've created. Is there something that we should be thinking about legally, culturally, historically, geopolitically about immigration that we've revisited in the past that we are seemingly repeating right now or working through?
I think one of the things that Jonathan brought up, actually, as he was sharing his story, is that we are so diverse, and we forget that. And so even back in 1986, when we implemented, a huge legalization program, many people were left out because they didn't speak Spanish. Like, we didn't include everybody. And so I think as we move forward, in addition to being flexible, I think is realizing that where you're coming from or the different types of either visas that we have, that everything is unique and it's so diverse. And so being able to include as many people as possible and make sure that our policies allow to help as everyone.
That's a great point. Others?
One of the, I think one of the themes that we see recurring in immigration history, and also part of what makes this different, is the story of assimilation. right? Like we know that Italians and the Irish were racialized in a lot of ways when they were but they assimilated, they became white. And so this is interesting because now we're dealing with populations, and some very fancy hoi polloi academics have written about this, that refuse to assimilate, right? These people wear funny things and they speak other languages.
Eat funny food.
They eat funny food, and it's kind of breaking the paradigm. So I think this part's different. I don't think we've faced this one before. Again, I think of the Chinese Exclusion Act, but then that's a complex history, the development of the Asian community. And just with that one in mind, I keep thinking of how we use the word immigrant to label an entire group of people as newcomer, not us. But there's a bunch of Latinos and Asian people that have been here forever, but it's very easy for us to look at them and be like, oh, that's an immigrant community. So I think this is part that we're going to have to grapple with is are we going to be okay with the definition of American expanding to something beyond the traditional mode of assimilation?
Well, isn't the different whiteness? I mean, in a lot of ways, as you described, many other populations who've come to the country, Irish, Italian, Russian, whatever the case may be, in a lot of ways, were able to assimilate, choose to assimilate, and not easily to be identified. If you are black or brown in this country, I don't think you necessarily have the opportunity to choose to do that directly, and you may not want to as well.
Right.
So that's a very thoughtful question. I see our first question from the audience, please. She said she jumped the line. Please come forward. Good evening.
Yes.
And I am a student here at Montgomery College, and I am not a traditional student this is my sophomore year. I've been 8 years here at Montgomery College.
All right.
I'm proud to say that I haven't given up on my education.
That's right.
My question is, today, DACA was being rescinded and no more applications were being accepted. As a student of Montgomery College and as a dreamer, I was down in Capitol Hill, making sure that our voices are being heard. We can find a change in policy that will create a solution. So my question will be to everybody here, to you as the president of Montgomery College, to Jonathan, to everyone, teachers and students. What is that we are going to do to make sure that we involve students here at Montgomery College and in each of the entities that you are representing to make sure that we involve them into an advocate program to push for legislation that will bring a solution not only to me but to 800,000 folks. We know that Montgomery College has been a leader since the beginning. I started college here before the Dream Act, but in advance I advocated for the Dream Act. And we want to know, and I as a student want to know, what is it the college is going to do to make sure that we involve our students in this process?
So I can speak for the college and then invite other people to participate. First of all, let me tell you, your story is one that is not dissimilar from hundreds, if not thousands, of students at this institution who take years and time and work and try to get their degree and are taking longer than the traditional route may take. So I celebrate you and I lift that up. The other thing that I'll share with you is that I was just in a meeting this morning. I love how the universe works because I was at a meeting this morning with a group of at our community engagement roundtable with a number of nonprofits in the area talking about a number of issues. But one of the things we talked about is how do we continue to lift up the lived experiences of the people that we are trying to advocate for and allow them to advocate for themselves and to be intentional in that. So during this period, the college has done a few things I think are important because I believe deeply that folks like me, based on my positional power, need to speak truth to power and will do that. readily and probably have to be told to stop every once in a while because I need to let other people talk about these issues. But we have been very deliberate on each of our campuses. This year we've had students organize events around DACA to inform their college community and peers about this issue, to talk about advocacy, to talk about legal remedies, to talk about legislation. They've joined me in writing letters to our elected officials to make the case for this. We're very fortunate to be in Maryland, where we have a delegation that is already at the forefront of this issue. And as a matter of fact, I wrote a letter. I probably heard back from 5 of them immediately. They were like, let me tell you what I think, and here's what I'm doing. And several of them are at the forefront of this issue. I think the other thing the college is doing is trying to figure out how we can continue to elevate resources within the broader community and to put that there so students can do that. The college can't offer legal advice. We can't do that, but what we can do is to bring people on campuses who can offer that. So each of the campuses has tied relationships, so they brought forums on it, had attorneys there, various centers who've done that, and we've also partnered to support entities in the community that are doing that work. I think last but not least, and I think this type of forum continues to do that. Literally, when we were talking about this, I said, I talked to my staff, I said, I want to do something around this space, and our students had already planned something on each of the campuses. I said, but I want to do something that brings in and offers a forum that the president can do that has a different, I think, level of hopefully voice within the community, and that's what we're doing. I welcome feedback about other things we can be doing as an organization, and certainly as me as the president, I welcome that. But I would invite other people to contribute that. Jonathan, I think you got called out, so I'll let you do that.
So first of all, thank you so much for asking the question. Ricardo and I have known each other for years since we were fighting for the DREAM Act together, actually out of Montgomery College. Yep. So there's that history of actually the college serving as an incubator for activism and students getting involved. But what I wanted to lift up, well, first of all, he forgot to casually mention he's a national organizer with the largest immigrant-led organization across the country and just really doing incredible work. And another example of the product that Montgomery College supports and puts out, right? But what I loved about your question is that you asked, how are we, all of us in this room, supporting those directly impacted to be able to take agency, right? I feel like oftentimes folks have this urge or this sense of being the voice for the voiceless, but no, we can speak too. Right? So I love that you center those folks who are directly impacted and are challenging all of us to be able to make sure that we are supporting those voices, centering those voices, and uplifting those voices as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments to that? All right, please come in.
Can I sneak in one comment on the last question? I would actually kind of partially turn that back to you with the following. So this is something that my wife and I have been brainstorming a lot. After the election, there's a bunch of resistance groups that have popped up, right? And we went to one of the local neighborhood resist groups, right? And just because of the demographics of where we lived, it was older white folks that were the primary people that were at this meeting because they're the ones that have the time and the resources to just show up for things like this, right? And they were a solution looking for a cause. And I've seen this more and more and more. We live in a very enlightened part of the country, and there are a lot of resources that are not matching. There's solutions that are not matching with the problems they can solve. So, and this is how it happens, right? Like you guys know this, you're organizers. These events, talk to us, let's network. Let's figure out a way to match these communities that can help with the folks that need help. Because a lot of times those are just connections that are not being made. And just one more accolade to MC. I myself am an MC alum, and I came undocumented from Mexico. We lucked out. We got adjustment through 86. But there was a time when this is the only place I could go. So This is where I came.
Ooh, see, I'm having a moment again. The last thing I'll say before, and I'll let you start, the other thing is that I think we have to make sure that we don't allow issues to be otherized. So therefore, we expect and only have undocumented students and employees and colleagues and friends talk about the issues of undocumented students, employees, and friends. I think that every issue needs allies. Every issue needs people who are going to be agitators and supporters, and your issue is my issue, and let's sit down and figure out how we work together to do that. And we've allowed ourselves to become so fragmented. We've lost a sense of community, and we're all joining these resist groups. Several people are joining resist groups. But what does that actually look like and mean, and how are we using that power in a way to create the change? Are we sitting around in a room still talking about how angry, mad, upset, frustrated we are, or have we figured out how to turn that power, turn that anger into power? So I'll let you start now, please.
I'm sure, but it's okay. Well, my name is Daniela Belmonte. I am a Montgomery College alumni, currently working on my bachelor's at University of Cherry Grove.
Awesome.
So thank you a lot. Thank you very much, Montgomery College, because you guys were the same. Before DACA started, you guys gave me an opportunity to start my studies. So thank you very much. And I want to point out on some things that were said in the panel, one of them being like it's a moral issue that we have to, tackle. Mostly, you guys said that the laws should match, the moral values. And I think there's a very big moral issue that hasn't been talked about, is that I remember when I applied for DACA, it was a big decision, and it took me a year before applying because I didn't know if I wanted to demonize my mother who had worked so hard. So that's one of the issues that is not being talked about a lot, that me as being mostly so supportive for my family now that I'm able to work, I have that pressure of I'm the only one that's bringing income. Now, that demonizes my mom because now she's being put at guilt for bringing me here, even though she was a really strong woman. Now, how would the laws, or how do you guys think we'll be able to resolve around that issue of demonizing those people that brought us just so we can have a better future?
Thank you for your courage and your question that you asked, and I would invite a panelist to chime in because I certainly could, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't want to hog the mic, but I will. Thank you so much for asking that question, because I, as an undocumented young person, I think about that a lot, right? Oftentimes when we're hearing, like you said, about this issue, it's about these young kids who were brought to this country through no fault of their own. What that misses is that my parents made an incredible act of love to be able to come to this country, to be able to endure all that they've been able to endure, to make sure that I had an opportunity, right? So to sort of comply with that narrative, it means that I'm sort of dismissing their sacrifice. And I think that the most practical way for me to be able to make sure that we're not demonizing the parents, because I'm nothing without my mama, So I'm not gonna throw her under the bus. So when we're talking about this legislative solution, right, there's the DREAM Act, of course, as you know, that's being debated. And it's really important that as we're negotiating the DREAM Act and the legislative solution, that we're making sure that no amendments are added to it that are gonna harm the rest of the undocumented population. So what do I mean by that? I'm talking about border enforcement, I'm talking about interior enforcement, I'm talking about the criminalization of immigrants overall, right? Those small things that seem benign at the beginning because they're about protecting America, right, from my mom, right? So I think it's really important that we remain vigilant in that legislative conversation so that we're not supporting young people like me at the expense of my parents.
I think it's a really, really great observation, and you're right that there's an implication that because the DACA recipients themselves are morally blameless, that their parents must have committed some kind of moral transgression. And as folks have said, we just have a really deep lack of understanding in this country about root causes of migration, right? Why is it that people migrate to the United States? What are the decisions that people make to enter the United States unlawfully or to overstay visas, right? Our whole legislative and policy debate is almost entirely blind, right, to the reality of life, insecurity in many parts of the world, and the reasons why people choose to migrate and why they may not have an option to get a visa and quote unquote stand in line. But I think what your question raises for me is just a broader issue, which is why is it that we have attached such a stigma to the act of entering the country unlawfully or overstaying a visa, right? Certainly it's a violation of our immigration law, it's become kind of a criminal penalty, but why is there such a deep resonance in our society about committing that act? And why is the penalty that attaches to that so severe, right? How have we gotten to that point? Right? If we look at other kinds of transgressions, right? If you are a shoplifter or if you commit a relatively kind of minor offense, you're not going to get the death penalty, right? You're not going to get a life sentence. You'll get a commensurate penalty. But in the area of immigration, this relatively minor act, right? It's an administrative violation. The rhetoric has moved to a point where the only possible solution for that is deportation, right? Or banishment. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think underlying that are these concepts of racialized and class-based exclusion, of kind of yearning for this idealized vision of the country, but we really need to push back strongly against this premise that the only penalty that's appropriate, right, for this act of entering the country unlawfully is deportation. Because as a matter of logic, of policy, and morality, it just doesn't make any sense.
What I find so provocative about what you just said is that we have allowed the rhetoric around the issue to truly create an other, and that other we demonized in a way. So I think about this young lady, and she poses the question, and I've heard Jonathan talk about this, and Sarah actually mentioned her family in her introduction, and also in the news piece that was done on her, that incredible act of love of a parent wanting a child to have better and different options, and to allow that to be co-opted into something ugly and negative and evil, and the only remedy is this. That's a very powerful statement. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Dr. Pollard, esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for this wonderful learning opportunity. It's really been very insightful, and I assume that all of us came here because we want to learn or because we care. And so my question is really for the audience. What next? What are we going to do after tonight? How are we going to honor the stories that these incredible young people shared with us tonight? I think that a great place to start is unitedwedream.org. It's an incredible resource. We all have our smartphones, whip it out, look it up. There's information on how we can take action, but also how we can donate, because political engagement and political mobilization isn't enough. We need to match that with philanthropy. My husband and I donated tonight in honor of this evening to Casa Maryland, who also initiated a lawsuit against the federal government today in support of DACA recipients. And so I really hope that we can walk away with that thought in mind. And my question now for the panel is, it's incredible that Montgomery College has created all of these wonderful platforms for students. What are you doing in the face of escalated enforcement to protect students?
So we've been very fortunate at the college, and perhaps it's a sign of the community that we live in, that we have not had actions of encroachment onto our campus by ICE and other entities. So we've done a couple of things I think is important. Probably because we're an educational institution, we think to have people know and understand their rights and to understand what options are available. So we spend a lot of time around education, both of our students, but also of our employees. We've been very deliberate to help employees understand if you are approached by someone who wants this, this is the mechanism that you go by to get that information. In particular, we spend a lot of time if someone shows up in your classroom, who to contact at the institution, that being general counsel and campus safety, to allow them, because if someone wants to come on and ask for someone, there's a process they have to go through our procedures and guidelines. We've also been very intentional to try to create partnerships so we can give referrals to people in the community about where you can go for legal services and support, for social services and support. We have a lot of county-based partners who work with us in that space. The other thing that I think is probably even more important for us is how to continue to raise consciousness. So we've supported student groups when they've done forums on each of our campuses around these issues, or we'll be doing them the same here to try to create the spaces for that. And finally, we've also continued to enhance our own protocols around FERPA, what we can do and provide, what information is directory information and what is not directory information, how do we know that they're correct routes that people go through. We have phenomenal enrollment services teams who are very thoughtful and guide us in this space. And probably for us, because we've been operating in this space for a long time, we also help peer institutions across the country understand what they can do in this space. Thank you.
Dr. Pollard, as we're waiting for the next question, just Clinic is a national network, so one of our offices is here in Montgomery County, but in addition to kind of knowing your rights and being able to exercise those rights, we've also put a focus on preparing if something were to happen, and I think everyone in our community should also think about that. If you were to have contact with enforcement, if a family member were to be detained for some reason, to have that conversation about what would happen, not only within your family, but just friends and your community, how you would, rise up and be supportive.
Thank you, Michelle. Great point. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm a white woman, and I have many friends from lots of, different places. And one of the things that I was just thinking while I was sitting up in the front, the people that you want to make sure that are on board with this are the people that do right now have the right to vote. And a lot of the people that are feeling very hurt and impassioned by this don't always have that. So I know that when I hear my white girlfriends talk about this issue, the one thing that they're concerned about is not that what the ethnicity of the people are. They're concerned about how this financially affects them. And so keeping that in mind, we're a country of laws. And what this is all going to boil down to is a law and what we want those laws to look like. And I think that I've heard a lot of people impassioned, but I haven't heard specific statistics and crunching the numbers. And from this gentleman who works, right over there, I heard you kind of get there a little bit, but I think maybe someone somewhere has to get a concerted effort together to get the same message, because what I hear through the news is that everyone is offended and everybody's angry, but I don't hear the solution. And I think you would win over a larger portion of the voting population if you could drive home those points why this is so much financially better for everyone, and it is. And what you said, a lot of people don't understand that it isn't the whole taking jobs away from people. A lot of times I really do believe that the media pushes a lot of this out there and gets people on opposite sides, rather than to looking at it together and saying, okay, there's gonna be a law. What do we want this law to look like? We want people to be able to stay. We want people to be able to thrive. But what is it gonna look like? No one's gonna say, okay, everybody just send in a postcard, I'm here and I'm staying. There's gonna have to be some steps. There's gonna have to a way of going from being undocumented to being documented, and what that all needs to look like. So I think that the facts of it need to be hashed out more by the people who have the concern about it. And if there's some kind of way, and maybe you can take a lead in this, of making a unified, these are the areas, these are the specifics to get the broader community, like the people you were talking about. There's a lot of really good people who think that there's really got to be a good solution to this. However, there's reservations based on a lot of the other junk that's thrown out there.
It's interesting. I really appreciate your comment, and I love how you said, I'm a white woman. I love the fact that you said, but I think we need to have more folks talking about the issue, because unfortunately, we tend to bifurcate everything as either this or that. The interesting part about this for me, and maybe those of you who work in this space more directly, is that public opinion actually supports this. I think it's like the last opinion poll I saw was 70 to 75% of Americans support a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, and very intentionally do not believe that Dreamers should be, or the DACA should go away. They think it should be made a law. Now, what I find very provocative about that is that there seems to be, though, this national narrative that's existing, that there isn't support for it. There's this either or choice that's being made. And I struggle with that, because I do think that there's a reason why those arguments get more time than the fact that people actually support these arguments and believe this is something that should be done. But I'll invite anybody in of the panel to contribute or respond to. And your name again? Kathy's question or comment.
I guess statistics are very important. You're talking about perhaps compiling information about the pros and cons of any.
What's the advantage? What is in it for people who are our citizens? What is in it for us? Why is it good? Now, we all kind of know it's good, but specifically, what's the data? What's the data? What would happen if the DACA's, based on your list, say there's going to be 40% of those DACA kids are going to have to leave the country. What's going to be the fallout of that? There's got to be fallout. If people can crunch those numbers and say, this is what this percentage brings to the economy. I never hear that. I never hear it, but it's not because it's not there.
Mm-hmm. I guess that Julia somehow made reference to that at the very beginning. There are scholars have conducted a study about the contribution of undocumented aliens, unauthorized aliens, and it's not simple about statistics. I think that there is a human dimension, and I think that some of our fellow panelists have mentioned that. When you talk about undocumented aliens, and that's part, I think, of the discussion, and it has been going on. These 11 million documented didn't fell out of the sky. As Julia mentioned, they have been an integral part of the economy, and they make contributions, and that's important. The very use of the word illegal alien has been stigmatized. I wonder, when you break the law in the United States of America and you are born in the United States of America, are you called, basically not an illegal alien, but an illegal citizen? You are not, And I Google it, and then I open the Webster Dictionary, and I sadly came across the same definition, illegal, and then sometime down there, I would come across the word Mexican, you see? So illegal alien has become our surname. It has become basically our namesake. And when you talk about illegal aliens, even though I'm a U.S. citizen, I know that whoever is supporting the agenda that would exclude immigrants from the United States of America, undocumented aliens, they are also talking about me. And I'm keenly aware of that. I know that they are talking about me, and they are talking about others. We have a friend in our family that is from India. At the beginning, she was not concerned because this was not her issue. And all of a sudden, the Trump administration is also targeting immigrants that bring highly skilled individuals from places like India. So then she became quite concerned. So the issue of undocumented aliens, it's a human issue for a very simple reason, because we all benefit. The people that are traveling in the snow in the winter most likely are undocumented aliens. You see, the people that helped to build the townhouse where I live uptown, most likely painters, roofers, drywallers, they might be undocumented aliens, and I know that some of them are, and we have to acknowledge their contributions. Because the U.S. economy has intermittently, spasmodically absorbed them.
That's what I'm saying, though, what you just said. If you could say a statistic, do you know that this percentage, and what would that happen? I need to get my house painted in the next 5 years. I wouldn't be able to do that. It's going to take me, I'm going to be in a 2-year line, because it's going to be a drop in the number of house painters. That's what I'm trying to say. I know you have a lot of feeling and family, and I get that. But to win over people that don't have family members that are in this situation, the way to do it is to say, how is this going to affect you? And all of a sudden, ooh, it is going to affect me. I'm being real. I'm not trying to be disrespectful of your feelings. Yeah. But honestly, that's going to get more people on board. Because honestly, most people go about their life and they deal with their life. And they might pay a little bit of attention to everything else, what's going on in the peripheral. But until it affects you personally, then you're not going to go out and hold a sign. But if people find out that this is going to affect them personally, it's going to make a big difference.
You know, what I hear you saying, and I think it's a very important point, Kathy, is that those of us who are trying to advocate for this issue have to remember that oftentimes we come from a much more informed place than others, and we also have to figure out how to translate this message in a way that's accessible to the people who also we need them to come on board. And a part of that is helping them understand how this impacts your life. There was a great day this summer, if I'm correct, a number of people did, where undocumented folks in our community disappeared for a day. And I oftentimes think that we need more of those examples of what happens when any number of people are not in our life who are there now, but also more importantly, how we build that compassion as well. So thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you.
I'll go to the next person behind.
Well, Dr. Pollard, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you. And
Can you hold the microphone down for me?
I said, I don't have a question. I just want to thank you. And I'm so emotional because you and Montgomery College with endless possibilities. And this is my girl, you know, I work for the school system. And we send you all these kids here. I know this girl since she came in here. And I have seen her grown thanks to you. And I just want to thank you for having all of this so we all can work together for our youth and the future of our kids. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. That's our community, Abilita. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tatiana Mendez. I am an alumni from Montgomery College. I graduated earlier this year. Unfortunately, I came in late, so I'm sorry if I repeat any of the things that were already said in the panel. I would like to go back to the point that Catherine, I believe,
Kathy,
is her name? Kathy, was saying. It is true that a lot of people, and we usually need something that affects us directly and personally to care, but I believe that's also the issue, and I think that's the role of educational institutions, to just think of any other human being as a human being who has a right to be safe, to have a roof over their heads, food for their family, access to education, everything that any human being needs, basic needs. And I think until we as humans realize that we need to respect the other just for being human, we're not gonna get anywhere, because we cannot wait until we convince people from, if we don't have immigrants, we don't have farm workers, we don't have avocados, or whatever produce or whatever any other thing. We need to stop. I am myself an immigrant. I have the privilege of being a naturalized citizen, and I'm using that privilege to speak, for others who are not in my position. I work with a population who have a temporary protected status that is kind of similar to DACA, and it's also under threat. And the thing we need to do is to stop drawing a higher standard for immigrants, that we are not an economic asset. We are not perfect, we are not perfect students, we are not perfect daughters, sons. We are humans like any other person in this country. And even though even though this is a great country, it is a very good place to be, a very safe place to be, it is not the only place in the world, and we need to also lower that conversation and separate ourselves from the rest of the world, because that's what's creating so much conflict in between many, groups. So I invite everyone not just to think of how is this gonna affect me, but just like this is gonna affect someone like me, someone who wants to, make their dreams true, work for their families, whatever. Just that's empathy, just try to put yourselves in documented or pre-documented, as I call it, immigrants. To just imagine you having to flee your house for whatever reason, and you have your kids with you. Just think of that, and not how is that gonna bring me more money or more commodities or whatever. So,
Humanity.
thank you.
Thank you. Please, you want to say something?
I missed your name, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for highlighting the humanity, right, of our people. I think that often gets lost in the national conversation about these policies and these numbers. And let's be clear, the numbers are clearly there, right? I did a quick Google search, right, on the economic impact of migration and found the Center for American Progress's report on how passing the DREAM Act would, of course, boost the economy by $148 billion by 2030. There's so many out there, right? If that's a more liberal leaning, if people want to choose a more conservative leaning, there's a Cato Institute. There's so many numbers out there. But at the end of the day, this is about people, right? This is about our right to migrate, to be free from persecution, right? To live safely and, grow with our family and be able to work and live earn an honest living, right? And that's often so lost. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and having this thoughtful dialogue. Part of my life, I teach every once in a while at Tacoma Park in political science. My name is Nancy Lineman, and I'm seeking actually advice. So much to the I'm a white lady ideal and picking up on that theme, I think that, given the fact that we are in this area and we are sort of similarly enlightened and have, generally speaking, a support of particularly DACA students, I think that, this is certainly an area where so many more people can come together in the immigration issue. When I go home to Pennsylvania and New Jersey and I speak to my parents and their friends and in their smaller communities, the conversation goes something like this. Hey, how about these DACA students? Can you believe that the administration is trying to throw them out? And in my mind, I have Sarah in my mind, because Sarah is working and Sarah is scooping ice cream and working for her family and fighting to get into her class seat every day. This is who I know, right? But my family and my people in places that are different from where we live have an enormously different view of what an immigrant looks like. And I will say that they're not saying kind words like immigrant, right? So how is it that and they don't know Sarah. They only get what they have in their mind. And so from the perspective of trying to come to the center and not being part of the polarization of like, everybody's got to be over here, everybody's got to be over there, what types of things do you think might be effective in having conversations to pull people more onto the side of what we're trying to accomplish, at the very least, for the DACA students that are really trying to be a greater foundation in our country? Thank you.
Great question.
I think one of the key words is humanization, right? I think what allows this people to become abstract problems is when we dehumanize. And I think, and to your point, I think for some people it's empirical ignorance, and if we see the numbers, maybe minds will change. That's not been my experience. Through work and family and friends, I meet a lot of folks like the ones that you've been describing. And the problem is, it's an empathy gap, right? Like, how can I put myself in this compassionate space where I see this person? And I think that's where you're so powerful, right? You have access to tables and worlds that other people won't have access to. And so I think if you get into an empirical political fight with your family, it's not going to go very well, right? And then Thanksgiving's going to be ruined, and everybody's going to be sad because more human relationships were ruptured. But if there's a way for you to humanize, right, and talk about Sarah and Jonathan, I think there's some hope there on this person to person, because whenever I've talked to people that were on, the opposite end of the political spectrum, when I approach them as a person, it's much more difficult for them to tell me to my face that I should suffer some horrible fate. Right? Will it change them ultimately? I don't know, maybe, but at least in that space, I think this is part of the when you start analyzing things like white privilege or male privilege, you can have conversations other people can't have, and we can't be shipping Sarah and Jonathan around all over the place, even though they're very good speakers. And I think that's one of the ways that you can exercise.
I think that idea of personalizing, and you do this exceptionally well in the work that you do all the time, this rings home for me very deeply. I have a 10-year-old son who's now in 5th grade, but I will never forget, 3rd grade, he came home and he was so upset that day. And I asked him, I said, "What's wrong, baby? We're having this conversation." And he says, "Mama," he says, "I don't know why," this actually had to have been last year, so 4th grade, I don't know why he's saying these things. And he was watching the debates, and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "My friend Mohammed, he says that he's going to have to leave the country." And he was so upset, and he said, why would he say that? And then he says, "And my friend Elena, she says she's not supposed to be here. What does that mean?" And she says, and he's 3rd grade having this conversation. And at that moment, 3rd or 4th, he became so galvanized around the issue of politics now that I don't have conversations with my 10-year-old because he can now talk me on these issues. But it's because it was personal for him. He wasn't having conversations about the DREAM Act and Dreamers and the election. He was thinking about Muhammad and Elena, who are his friends, who won't be here next year, in his mind because of what he saw happening in a debate about the national election. Now, he's 10 and a very compassionate child, but I think that there are that opportunity to tell stories about people's lives and their lived experiences. If you plant seeds, as you well know, hopefully you'll get to see them. Yeah, there we go. She said she'd be happy to.
It's not going to be the first. It might not be the first time, or the second time, or the 3rd time that you share a story. And so, if you can keep trying.
So I want to be respectful of your time. It is 8:45, and I want to do 2 things. One, allow our panelists to offer any concluding thoughts, things that they wish I had asked, or some of the questions I sent that I never got to and you want to respond to. And then I'll offer a couple concluding comments, and then allow us to fellowship together as a group. Maybe I'll start with you, Julie. If there's anything that you'd like to say that we didn't get a chance to cover, or a concluding thought you want to offer.
The question about, kind of the specifics of the policy just brought to mind that we didn't go over because there are now, I think, 5 bills in Congress that would offer some relief to young people who have DACA or other people in a similar situation. It's kind of a fast-moving target, and, Congress is in a place of, trying to figure out who wants what, where does the White House stand, where does this stand, but I encourage everyone just to go and read about the bills. They're the National Immigration Law Center, I think probably Clinic, other groups are putting together really good summaries of just here are these bills, here's how they're different, here are the age requirements, education requirements, how long would it take, as you're mentioning, to get to the green card, or to get to citizenship, would you be able to sponsor family later on, and just, educate yourself about what all of those are, and if you, I encourage everyone to be involved if you have an opinion, to express that opinion to your to your representatives in Congress as well.
Would you all join me in thanking Dr. Gillette? Professor Hernandez, Jackie?
Yeah, I think that we all should encourage people to have like an evening with Sarah, you see, with the students like her, because that's the way you somehow try to bridge the empathy gap that you want to make reference to. That is important, but to become familiar with history is also equally important. You know, I think that Bonar make reference to discriminations against Japanese. Before that, discrimination against the Irish, you know, in the 1840s, in the 1850s. Eventually, discrimination against Eastern and Southern Europeans. That's why in the year of 1921, 1924, they capped the numbers of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe and in favor of immigrants from Northwestern Europe. And something that perhaps the President and Mr. Bannon have forgotten, that their ancestors were recent immigrants to the U.S. And what is sad is that I understand that Steve Bannon has Irish immigrant. And I also understand that Mr. Trump has German ancestry, and that I'm not sure it was his father or his grandfather that was somehow hiding the fact that they were actually Germans, that you have Germans. One World War I broke out because there was a backlash against German immigrants. So we are all immigrants. It's like it's basically like a slogan, you know, but that's for real. And we have to become keenly aware of our own roots, especially white Americans.
Would you all join me in thanking Professor Hernandez, Jackie?
Dinners as well. But this past year has been really rough. I think my relationship to this country has been fundamentally challenged. Right, the role that I see myself playing as a part of this experiment that we like to call the United States of America has been challenged. But one thing that hasn't been challenged is my belief in what we have together, right? My understanding and my appreciation for institutions like Montgomery College, but also a lot of you out there that have been an integral part of my journey. I think of Dr. Grace, I think about Señora Teresita Wright, I think about all of you that have played an incredible role in supporting me personally through my education, my advocacy with so many of you as well. And I don't take those things for granted, right? And I think about those moments when I'm wondering if it's time to just pack up and just go somewhere else because I feel like I'm not wanted here, right? So I urge us to really think about the mental, physical, and emotional toll that this administration is having on our immigrant communities. The fact that I somehow now have back problems and migraines that I didn't quite have last year, and I wonder why, right? And all the stress that's happening around our communities. Our communities are in a state of emergency. And I feel like oftentimes people don't get that, right? Like the way in which we're acting and we're trying to survive in this country, it's just heartbreaking. And at the end of the day, what I want y'all to take away is asking yourselves the question, which kind of country do you want to live in, right? Do our laws and actions from our elected leaders match the values that you believe are part of the United States of America? If the answer is no, then you've got some work to do. Thank you.
Wow. Professor Molina Gracia, anything you'd like to say?
So in 2005, I finally went up for my citizenship interview, and it's changed since then. But at the time, one of the questions I was asked is, are you a habitual drunkard? And I kind of snickered, and I said, well, define habitual. And the officer looked at me very seriously and said, it's not a joke. And at that time, it was so surreal, right? I was so American that I felt entitled to be American. And this person had the power to say no. And so that was a profound existential moment for me. And I keep that in mind when I think of the dreamers, right? That what cost, as you put it, it must be to know what you are and not be allowed to be that. How messed up is that? Right? So in the moments of existential angst and temptation toward nihilism, know that many of us know that you are the best that America has to offer.
So I've been kind of thrown. It's been hard for me to speak during the panel because I invited my family and I saw their faces and I just couldn't help but cry. So I kind of blame them. Jonathan took the words right out of my mouth this whole time. But you know, the reason I'm here is because I'm putting a human face, and the reason Jonathan is here is because we're putting a human face to this issue. You know, when I found out the news, I honestly felt betrayed by my fellow American citizens because I've been, you know, a volunteer of this community. You know, I bring it down to, you know, your community because that's the best one person can do. I've taken care of American citizens' children. I go to school. I give a voice to those who can't. So, you know, I felt betrayed in that sense, but moving forward, you know, the reason I've done the interviews, the reason I'm here is because I know a lot of DACA beneficiaries who don't want to come out and tell their story. So when you think of me or you think of Jonathan, then you have that stemmed in your brain. You know, these are people, you know, you really have to have that empathy in you to put yourself in someone's shoes and wonder how someone would feel if someone told you that you had to leave this country, leave your life. This is the only life I've known, and I say this is a tired out statement from all our DACA beneficiaries, but this is all we've ever known. But you know, I want to continue to advocate for this issue and hopefully not cry too much. You know, this is all very raw and new. You know, it's only been a month since Jeff Sessions made that announcement, so it's still very new. You know, I came here thinking I'm not going to get emotional, but I think it's good that I did because, you know, I don't want you to feel bad for me. I want you to help me fight for this issue. So thank you for coming today.
Professor Guy.
So, gosh, I guess a couple of things. First is that, you know, there are a couple of the comments at the end were really about how do we persuade people in the middle, and I really do think, or, you know, on the other side, and I really do think that that is a critical question I don't have a great answer to, other than to say that I think that there's different ways that people can be persuaded, and that there's not a single formula, right? So there's some people who really respond well to data, there's some people who really respond well to stories, there's some people who just really respond well to kind of personal interactions and contact, and that we just kind of have to keep hitting it on all fronts. Second point I'll make is that we have to think about building power in the community, right? I mean, that's really just fundamental because it is true that we need to get more people registered to vote, but there's other ways that we can continue to organize and build power and have influence over the debates. And so that's an ongoing process that we have to keep our eye on, because until we're able to kind of give power to the community that is right now lacking that power in order so that they can advocate for themselves and to bring about the changes to policies, we're going to continue to repeat the same cycles that we've seen, you know, over the course of our whole history. And the last thing that I'll say is that my father passed away recently, and he was an immigrant from India. And so in the last month or so, I've been thinking a lot about how, he literally came from nothing, was fortunate to get a visa to come to this country. And, when I think about what his children have been able to accomplish, it just kind of takes my breath away. And I know he couldn't have done what he did unless there were people along the way who just gave him a hand. And he told me this so many times just in the last few months of his life that, you know, when I first moved to Chicago, there were people who got me a job and they didn't know me from anyone and they were there for me. And it really just stuck with me. It's one of the things that I've really kind of meditated on, is that we really just need to be there for the people who are recently arriving, who are vulnerable, who need help. And there's things that we can do that are just everyday things, you know, being friendly, helping somebody get a job, giving somebody a hand, donating, you know, things to people. And just, I think we all need to make that extra effort and recognize that those kind of acts of kindness and support are really invaluable and can be transformative in people's lives.
Thank you. Ms. Sardone, please.
I guess, first and foremost, Sarah, John, it has been an honor and a privilege to share the stage with you tonight. So just know that. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to remind you that I hope this is just a first step to learn more. I think DACA is one program. It impacts 800,000 individuals right now. Who knows what the future holds, but to also just to remind you to get to know your neighbor. Here in the DC area, there are over 40,000 people with something called temporary protected status. There are huge numbers of refugees that are resettled in this area. So just to never stop getting to know your neighbor, I think makes us all better individuals, and so to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. So in my 2 minutes here, 3, let me do something right quick. I called out earlier because someone talked about agency and letting those people who represent us know what our issues are, and I recognize someone from Senator Van Hollen's office is here. I also want to acknowledge and thank one of our Maryland delegates who is here, Ann Kaiser. Not only is she a friend of the college, but she's prolific on this issue and has been a very thoughtful advocate. So we want to thank her leadership in helping us to advance the Maryland Dream Act. So thank you for choosing to be here tonight as well. I hope that you are as deeply moved by these conversations today as I was, and certainly as our panelists were. This is the type of work that community colleges do. We serve our community, and I like to think that if we want to talk about the health and wellness of our community, it is dependent upon the health and wellness of this community college, to provide access to all, to be radically inclusive in how we choose this work, and to sometimes bring up vulnerable and uncomfortable conversations to speak truth to power. And at the end of the day, if we do it very, very well, none of us leave this space the same, and we go out and have conversations someplace else. And I invite you, I've been doing something this past year after this elective season. I am doing dinner parties at my house, and I invite different people over to have conversations. And sometimes those conversations are tear-filled explorations of who we are as Americans, and sometimes it's angry resistance meetings. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure that we talk to each other, that we understand and lift up the lived experiences of the other person, who we call neighbor, who we call friend, who we call colleague. And I hope and invite you to do that as well. And if you want to be a part of these types of conversations, this year the President's Dialogue Series is going to focus on this idea of the American experience. What does it mean to be an American, and how do we talk about this in a time when the very values of who we think we are being challenged? And our first, on next Tuesday, the 10th, We will have the first guest of that will be the president of Trinity University, Pat McGuire, will be at our Tacoma Park Silver Spring campus. I hope that you would choose to join us there. And more importantly, let me thank a few people. I want to thank Dr. Megan Gibbons from my office, who does so much of the heavy lifting on this. She gets mad when I call her out. And I also want to thank our special events team for making sure that we have this here, and always the incomparable MCTV for what they do in making sure that this will be able, you can see it and enjoy the experience from here. So thank you all for being here tonight. Please join us for some refreshments as we depart this space, but not this conversation.